Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences from some of the greatest coaches in the world. I'm Michael Kurkowski, so grateful for you joining me today. And if you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to support the show. All right, let's dive in. Here we go. All right, we're up and live. Gray Cook, an honor to have you back on the show. Great to see you. Thank you for coming on the show, man.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've listened to a few of your episodes, really good back and forth. So I have no idea what's getting ready to happen, but I think it'll be fun. So
as I said, this is pickup hoops right here. Like we are just going back and forth. No fouls at all, ever called on here, but we'll get no injuries in here. We'll just have a good time and then just head off from there. But again, appreciate you coming on, taking some time here of diving in with me. So it was a little backstory. So 3 years ago, we first chatted on the last podcast, which we riffed for a long time in here. We're going to dive into some good meat of a lot of different topics here. But I had to say, I wanted to kick this one off just giving you a little flowers on here because I was the one that, it was 17 years ago, I believe, that I met you in Mahwah, New Jersey and got into FMS. So right before that, I met a good friend of mine, Travis Gill, who became my personal trainer, and he introduced me into doing a functional movement screen. I had no idea what this was about. I was, a 23-year-old kid, so I think that my shit don't stink. I can do anything in the gym. And I found so many asymmetries and compensation in my movement at a young age, because at 14 I had a slipped epiphysis in my left side and I had to get a pin inserted in there, which caused so many dysfunctions in just my natural movement. But when you're 20 years old, you don't really feel those things at the time. But when I was aware of it and I got some perception of how I was actually moving and then corrected it, I didn't even realize that I wasn't feeling good in my movement until I actually started to feel good. And then I got into the education of it, which brought me into FMS level 1 and 2, which brought me into the RKC and Strong First, and eventually built my career. So if I've helped anybody in the 15 plus years in my career, it's in many ways because of you. So I just have to say thank you for that.
I am honored that you look at it that way, and I am blessed to have sort of had a really good front row seat to this functional message. Because when I came out of PT school, the same year I left University of Miami, which was 1990, with my physical therapy degree, I became a strength coach that very same year. So I've always tried to look at both sides of this, meaning most of the time, no one's ever listened to me as Gray Cook, the strength coach, right? Because there's a lot of strength coaches out there that have accomplished a lot of stuff. So I always get my advice compared to theirs. What people don't understand is where I've inserted myself into strength conditioning is I usually get injured people. And when I have these high profile people, the professional football players, the Red Bull speed skater, these people who've got a complicating injury, don't think I'm the first physical therapist that they've seen. They've been through a lot of opinions and it's not working out, and they get to me. And as I do what I do, as we're coming out of rehab and getting back into putting you back where you need to be, I'm like, let's talk about your workout. Well, I'm going to get back into some of the same stuff I was doing. And I'm like, then you're going to be right back on the table that you just got off of, because I think that path you were on might have something to do with this. Because to your point, when you're strong and fit, you are more capable to compensate than any other time in your life. And the compensation I'm talking about is not necessarily going to be visually apparent to me. There are things you can do in your deadlift on a force plate that I can't see with my eyes, but I can throw 2 force plates, one under each foot, and see one foot spinning out, rotating, and shear force. Okay. Well, the movement screen tells me that's happening anyway, because if you can't lunge on one side and you can on the other, do you think your deadlift and your squat is 50-50? It's not. You're naturally doing 60-40 just to get through the technique so Brett or me doesn't yell at you. And so going into that movement screen and not just looking for tightness and weakness, or not just saying you flunked your push-up, we got to do core work. Lee and I originally got on this journey with the movement screen, realizing that left right asymmetries in fundamental movement patterns are actually more predictive of movement problems than just being a little tight or a little weak
Mhm.
globally. Okay. So that asymmetry thing set us on a path of saying we're not just comparing knee flexion to knee flexion. We're comparing lunge to lunge, reach to reach, balance to
Mm.
balance. And just like you said, you look fit because every exercise we throw at you has a little bit of disguise, a little bit of makeup, and a little bit of compensation. So you are technically correct and still wrong in what you're doing.
Mm.
At the same time, and without having you train with cameras and force plates, the only other thing I have is let's look at your movement signature first,
Mhm.
because you said something really cool. On the other side of cleaning up those asymmetries, you feel different,
Yeah.
but you don't even know what you're looking for until you get there.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so having your movement screen in my hand, knowing that you're a high score movement screen with no asymmetries or extremely low score movement screen with multiple asymmetries, I know how you feel.
Mm.
I've been both places. I know how you feel. And I know when those numbers change, even though you might not articulate it the way most of your guests on this podcast
Mhm.
will articulate it. You as my client and I will connect on the fact that that's what better balance feels like.
Mhm.
That's what better symmetry feels. That's what ankle mobility feels like. That's what hip extension actually feels like. And we got this thing, and it took us a number in a screen to get there. But on the other side of that is, yeah, man, I think you can let go of most of those correctives. Do your Turkish get up as a warm up from now on, and do it with a little bit of integrity. Like Pavel's in the room, you'll be fine.
Right.
And that's it. That's your warm up. But you took me back to Mahwah, New Jersey,
Yes. Yeah.
until we taught a
It was like,
course
was
there.
it like a Hilton? I think it was a Hilton, like in the, yeah,
It
in some
was
conference room in the Hilton. Mhm.
right off the exit or whatever.
Yeah.
So my opening joke in that workshop was, because Chris Poirier and Perform Better were sponsoring us back in those days too. I said, guys, Chris called me. He's got a thick Rhode Island accent. And I could have sworn I agreed to do a conference in Maui. And this is Mawa. It's not
Yeah.
the same thing, but with Chris's accent and a bad cell connection, it sounded like we were doing an FMS
That's
level.
it. Yeah. Get your
Maui.
luau on and
Hell yeah.
go over to Mahwah, New Jersey, the big metropolis and tropical paradise of Mahwah, right off the interstate, right there.
Yep. I was just getting into paddleboarding. I'm like, man, I could probably get an inflatable. I get it on the plane. It'd be good. But
I was gonna say,
no,
oh,
man,
yeah.
I'm glad you were there, and I'm
Mhm.
glad that our perspective led you into what I consider some of the most functional ways to continue training beyond the screen, which is a lot of the stuff that RKC and Strong First have been doing, and stuff that doesn't deny the straight bar has value, but there's a whole world of strength training out there that can be accomplished with ropes and bags and everything. And so my point is, what are you asking this piece of equipment to do for you, and what can you measure that it did in a short haul and in a long haul?
Yeah. I mean, I love what you said even right at the beginning of that connection between the physical therapy brain and then also the strength coach brain, and I think connecting those both together was one of the first things I remember of getting into this. Like, this isn't just a clinical practice. This is something that everybody in personal training and strength and conditioning coaches all need to have a baseline in there. And a baseline should be tested. And I love that's a statement I know you use a lot in your lectures now of like, don't trust me, test me. And this is what you do over is you have to keep testing and see these things, because if the baseline is bad, that is a predictor that something's going to happen. Maybe not now, but eventually down the road it is. And I remember being a 23, 24-year-old kid, and you're made of vibranium at that time, from Wakanda. Nothing can penetrate you at that time. But eventually down the road, that's going to happen. But the same thing when you said perception, I personally had no idea what good actually felt like until we actually got into some correctives and worked with it. So I think it was so powerful. I wanted to start this though and just and bring you back into the work that you've done. I mean, you've been doing this over 20 years, like 60,000 professionals have gone through the FMS system and built up. Was the mission, what was the mission when you first got started into the FMS and building this system? And has it changed and evolved at all as you've continuously gone along this process?
Give you a quick story. Graduated University of Miami as broke as I could be. Got through on 4 loans and a prayer. I took my first year of employment in Danville, Illinois. Now, even though I grew up in Danville, Virginia, I'm in Danville, Illinois, United Samaritans Medical Center, and it was not a good situation. But they gave me some money. I paid off some debt, bought myself a little bitty truck, drove out to Illinois and started my physical therapy career. The year, or at the end of that contract, I was introduced to a physical therapist named Paul Hughes. And it's almost like you basically got your pilot's license and then they introduce you to a guy named Maverick. And you get to sit beside him for 3 years. And that's who Paul Hughes was. He, believe it or not, was a linchpin in a lot of the technical manual therapy, the physical therapist who manipulate joints and dry needles. Now that's sort of Top Gun stuff. Mm-hmm. And not every therapist does that kind of thing, and not every therapist has that confidence level. But Paul Hughes was so revered in his area that when an insurance company had 5 physicians disagreeing on a musculoskeletal case, they'd pull him in to find the truth. Because where I got my systematic approach on my physical therapy life, the FMS counterpoint in healthcare is called the SFMA. And that is also leaving no stone unturned. Everybody in my waiting room already knows what hurts. My job is to find out what else is a complicating factor or a limiting factor to me doing that. So there's a lot of people right now, you say my quad hurts, and that's exactly where they're going to stick a dry needle. Right. And I could give you an app that would tell you to do that. That's not right. A lot of higher level thinking and problem solving. So the body is sending signals other than pain if we listen and if we look. And Paul showed me this systematic baseline. I'm going to run every patient, whether they got jaw pain or big toe pain, through a series of movements. And at the time, it was sort of revolutionary. But when you go to the dentist and you have a cavity on one of the back right molars, are you assuming he's not checking out all the other teeth while he's in there, just sort of getting a lay of the land and maybe a little proactive approach? Hey, you got one over here too. I might want to get an x-ray up. You assume that. You cannot assume that in chiropractic and physical therapy right now. They will go for what you pointed at because that's what they get paid to do. That's what they're incentivized to do. And to be honest, they don't have a lot of time to do anything else. I tried to create a Trojan horse, forcing myself and my staff in the early days. This is your one touch with them. Look at everything. You can't fix everything, but if ankle mobility is the reason your knee's hurting, and I just heat you up and cool you down and scrape you out and needle you up, I can get your quad feeling better. But next time you do swings, snatches, and deep squats, your knee's got no choice but to valgus because you ran out of dorsiflexion just like you did when you blew it to begin with. And we've been proven right. Of the 16 musculoskeletal risk factors that would allow me to put you in high risk, moderate risk, slight risk, or low risk, and let's just say you're going through boot camp or you're going through a 5-day MoveNat thing or RKC or something. Mm-hmm. If I were able to do this little risk appraisal, and by the way, we can do it on an app right now. You got 15 minutes. I can get you 80% of what a movement screen would have given you without a camera. So that is there. It's already there. So people who say, I don't need it and I don't have enough time, my answer to both those is yes, you do. And yes, you do. And so screening has become a lot better, but to the point of this perspective, it gives me a competitive advantage because I honestly think the first movement screen I do gives me an idea of what you've been through, how you feel, if you've got some baggage, if you've been training improperly. But the second time I do a movement screen on you, I'm checking for my influence on your trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
You could be a fast responder, a medium responder, a slow responder.
Right.
You know what really determines that? Not your problem, the amount of risk factors that are riding on you, right? So if you're overweight, if you have challenged balance, if you've got one stiff hip, if you don't have the ability to plank on one side like you did on the other, every one of these things, they don't add up 1 + 1. They're multipliers, right? So you get to a point where of the 16 risk factors that we're currently looking at in the background with some of our best teams, hardest chargers, we've got movement screens on every athlete from China in the last Olympics.
Wow.
We got a dash, so we can see how this plays out.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, a lot of people don't assume responsibility for that second movement screen. And that's how I ran my first clinic, because when I came back from Illinois, working with Paul Hughes, Top Gun, I found myself as a 30-something and a director of 3 different clinics and over 30 staff. I'm talking athletic trainers, strength coaches, and PTs. And because Paul had gotten me to be a little mini maverick, everybody just assumed because I was an expert, I was also a leader. I didn't know shit about leadership. But I said it when I debated Stu McGill on stage at Stanford. The whole thing boils down to communication and accountability. If we don't have that, I don't think I can do this thing. So I had to be good at my skill set, but leadership was actually setting a bar that would even be hard for me to hit. Therefore, my staff knew when I didn't close a case, but I equally knew when they didn't close a case. And instead of throwing each other under the bus, we realized, if we follow standard operating procedure in the cockpit, we got an 80-20 play. That means 80% of the people that come through this clinic door that I evaluate, even though I might be their therapist, I might say, dude over here is great with knees. I'm going to put you on his schedule and I'm going to check in if things aren't going exactly like we planned. But I would not treat most of the patients I saw. So as a young leader, I put myself up for quite a bit more paperwork and evaluation work in the early days. So by the time I was close to 40, I'd already seen more evaluations than most people who had 10 years experience on me. Now, they'd done a lot more ultrasounds, right?
Right.
Smearing gel around your thigh while counting the ceiling.
Yeah, the acute spot. Yeah.
I already knew how to ultrasound, and there was 20 people in the clinic that could do that as good as I could, right? I was the only one in the clinic to crack a neck at the time. So I had to keep my room open for new patients that needed to be put on a path, and the 20% that didn't go like I thought. Of the 20% that aren't moving forward, usually half that group, we missed a step, we missed a confrontation, we didn't measure something, we didn't have communication accountability. And the other half of that, they were non-compliant. So I got no problem. If I do everything right and you don't, how's this relationship going to go further? Right. It's not. So I've always been very, very transparent with my patients. If I give you advice and you don't take it, I am going to call you out on it, because as a physical therapist, the only way I can help you with the symptoms is for you to follow my advice. Even if you don't follow my advice and you got low back pain as a doctor, I can put you on opioids and you're going to sit down in that chair and feel just great. That's
a good day. Yes.
Pharmaceuticals can remove the symptoms that your toxic lifestyle and poor activity decisions have given you, whether you're overactive in the wrong direction or unbelievably sedentary and underactive. And the way we can track things now with wearables and apps and stuff like that, my communication and accountability just doesn't go to the staff or the people that I'm in leadership of. It goes right to you. So your self-care is a big part of this. And if you come to me with greater risk factors than somebody else, I got to get up in your face about that in a kind and loving and transparent way really quick. So I'll give you mine right now. I don't sleep well. I got a Garmin watch, I got an Oura ring, and I got a wife. All three agree. Gray Cook sleeps like shit. I just do. I had
Which
18
one rings the loudest? I'm going to get you in trouble here.
The Oura ring is the most accurate. My wife is the most influential.
There you go. As it should be.
Yes. Yes. And so we've all got to admit that weakest link. And it's not always a movement thing, but it can still complicate the movement mission. So how many strength coaches are unbelievably enthusiastic about maybe, oh, I want you to get on this new program or my new plan. I'm going to rejigger the stress. Well, if you don't match that with an equal level of recovery, it doesn't matter what the program is. It's the stress recovery cycle. And when I wrote the book, Athletic Body and Balance, I think it was published in 2003, I really started with that yin yang symbol, thinking, you know, the Western scientist wants to see a circle that's half black and half white. That's not what that symbol of Taoism shows us.
Right.
There's a little bit of black in the white, and there's a little bit
Yep.
of white in the black. And no matter how you slice that circle, you've got a 50-50 relationship because the opposites define each other. So good recovery can be measured with heart rate variability. And good activity can be measured with what was your output, what was your efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. And we talked about that early in the days. Compensators have unnecessary energy leaks.
Okay.
We both ran a 100-yard dash, but you got a rock in your shoe. You're going to be inefficient because you're going to be forced to do something different. And doing something different outside of full speed ahead forward is going to cost you. And that energy is leaking out of you, but not in a benign way. That energy, when you move poorly, when you flunk a movement screen and persist in loads and speeds and power, comes out of you in shear force, tensegrity, small microscopic tears, more stress on one muscle than the other. Anytime somebody gets a muscle tear, that's not a unified movement. That's a one muscle took the whole blunt of that. So I hear people get stuck in a system. You know, we were on fiber types for a long time. Now we got the fascial people and stuff like that. 80% of a muscle attaches exactly where they told you it did in kinesiology class. Okay. So 80% of my quad effort goes right to my tibial tuberosity. There's another 20% of that fascial matrix that goes everywhere else to sort of zip up the skin suit. So think about this. Every time you contract a muscle, you contract the entire body sock and then the lever proper that you're working on. And if that's not matched as a unified effort, and if it's not matched across the patterns that laid your neurological framework, you're going to have isolated areas of shear, stress, and tearing. And we call that tendonitis, arthritis, bursitis. And we think that's the problem. No, what caused that's the problem. It's almost like thinking alcoholism's the problem. Alcoholism's not the problem. It's what's causing alcoholism. That's the problem. And until you get to that, you can try to stop drinking, but every day that dragon gets too big, you're going to wind up with a bottle in your hand again. So I've always been enthusiastic about going upstream. I can make you feel better today. I'm a good clinician. I have a good skill set, but that doesn't mean I healed you. That just means I got you off a bad track. But unless we get to the headwaters of my sleep problem and your asymmetries and her pelvic floor issue and his neck problem, we're all going to be chasing stuff, drinking more green tea, putting more icy hot here, more CBD stick there.
Yeah.
It's symptom management, different.
That's interesting when you said, because I always equated for a long time, like, oh, poor movement quality means there's an eventual predictor that an injury is going to come up and stuff. And that's all right. But also, as you said, poor movement quality is naturally just increasing the daily stress that you're putting on in your day, which could affect maybe HRV and like conditioning aspects of it. So it's actually diminishing even if you're feeling okay in your body, you're still working at a deficient marker and you're never going to be at your best.
Yeah, and this whole thing about injury prediction,
Mhm.
that those are words that have been shoved in our mouth. We predict risk, right?
Right.
And so what we realized, and I was at the NFL Combine probably 12, 15 years ago and said, listen, 100% of the guys, this is the whole NFL Combine, this is all the athletic trainers and strength coaches, and 100% of the guys you're working with have already been injured and they're already going to be injured again. So we're already at 100%. What the movement screen helps me understand is if you do get a grade 2 ankle sprain and you got a low movement screen, it's going to take longer to get you right back to where you were. And Mike Contreras, a great strength coach, old school RKC, strong first FMS guy, started doing movement screens at the beginning of the Orange County Firefighter Academy. Okay. The 80% that had acceptable movement screens consumed 20% of the resources of the academy to get out of the academy. The 20% with low movement screens, right? Everybody gets bumped, everybody gets bruised, everybody gets hurt. If you're pushing at the edge of your ability in a rich sensory environment, boo-boos are going to happen. But if that's the only problem you got, then it's a predictable boo-boo. And if you got a backpack full of rocks, or as Mike Contreras said on the podcast, if this guy's a bag of bolts,
Right.
that ACL is going to perpetuate into low back pain, okay? A hip problem. He's probably going to get a fallen arch. He's probably going to have a reduced quality of life. He's probably going to have poor HRV and sleep. He's going to lose the ability to maybe jog recreationally, and now he needs Prozac to cover that up. It's a bad way. So the baggage you bring has a lot more to do with the next injury you have. So I'm not saying you're going to get injured. I'm going to say you're going to experience either an injury or a lack of success. And if you're in a situation where you have an inevitable injury, we're all going to get beat up here. It's going to take you longer to get back to the same place because you didn't acknowledge the baggage that you had. You know, you fill a trunk of your car with kettlebells and you get in a car accident. It's just going to be worse,
Right.
for you than the car you hit. It's just,
I know you might ding your kettlebell and then it's not pretty anymore.
It reminds me of Anchorman 2 when they wreck the RV and all this stuff is flying around. I see a kettlebell car accident.
Goes in slow motion, roll it all the way. Yeah. What's interesting, what you said there too is, how many times we're looking for an immediate response with stuff. And I know one of the things that you've done the comparison of is that response versus adaptation. It's like you want to get that initial response out, and that's what people are looking for because you want somebody to feel good. And now, oh yeah, my system works, but that's not necessarily fixing what's going on. Yeah, maybe you get an initial response, and you can do that in a lot of different ways, but it's not necessarily adaptation. So when we're going through things like doing corrective exercises, should you see like a response immediately from somebody if it worked on that? Does it work that quickly?
Dude, you teed it up for me perfect. Last year, I did 2 master classes, one on mobility and one on motor control, basically mobility and stability. And this is sort of like the Socratic method on the steps of the gymnasium, right? We work out in the morning, we philosophize in the afternoon. Is the reason you couldn't move as a young man coming to your first FMS a muscle tone problem or a tissue quality problem? And you don't have to answer that, but if you couldn't touch your toes that day and I pulled you up on stage and did old Gray Cook toe touch progression, then you could, that ain't a tissue problem because I'm not that good. Right. Tissue can't change that quickly. Your cellular matrix does not respond. But if you came at your toe touch with lit up QLs and overactive hamstrings and hip flexor incongruity and stuff like that, then all I did was run you through a car wash that made you dump unnecessary and inefficient tone because you might have been sort of myopic training. You could have been sagittal plane training a lot, banging yourself around. And so if I can do a quick little corrective maneuver. And you don't just drop these where you think. You do a screen so you know, I got a baseline now. You had a bad movement. I do a thing, you got a good movement. If you see it change in a single session, that's a big tone issue. And this is basically a kid saying, could you please give my car more horsepower? And you're like, yeah, take your foot off the brake, right? I don't have to, you don't need nitrous oxide. You don't need a chip. You don't need anything in your car. You don't need high octane gas. Take your freaking foot off the brake. Right. So when I see somebody who's in a toxic lifestyle or overstressing themselves in the gym or in work or whatever, I can make a big change in a small amount of time because your body naturally puts parking brakes on and keeps you out of harm's way. That's a protective mechanism. Mm-hmm. Now, if I see a slow responder and realize, oh, you haven't touched your toes in 35 years, right? Then that's when we break out our tools, right? We start talking like a massage therapist. We got to get more circulation in here. Mm-hmm. We start scraping, we start dry needling. Your tissue's not ready. I mean, I wouldn't want to see you get a toe touch today because it probably means I tore something, right? Or we're going to have some bruising, right? So I went into this deep whiteboard discussion, had a lot of examples about, are you sure you're working with more tone or more tissue here? Because if you look at most of the arguments on the internet, most of the vibration guns, scraping tools, CBD rubs, and all this stuff that we're slathering on the body and shaking up the body and vibrating it off and stuff like that, you're assuming you got bad tissue. And if you already know, then get on that path, but admit to yourself, if that stuff's not working in a 4 to 6 week period, then you're not even adapting right. So I use that original movement screen to find out what you got. I look at the weakest link in your movement, and we have a hierarchy for that. If you can't hip hinge, I don't care about your squat. If you can't bend your ankles, I don't care about your squat. I can go to those patterns. And if I can influence that, then I'm going to say, here's a 5-minute kata that I need you to do twice a day, because there's 2 times I want you to dump that tension: before you start your active day or before you start your workout and before you go to bed. And so on YouTube right now, I've got 3 things called flows. I got a mobility flow, a stability or motor control flow, and a symmetry flow. And I tell people, if you already know you're stiff, do the mobility flow. If you've had some spinal issues and some balance problems, do the stability flow. And if you think you're pretty put together, then do the symmetry flow, and you'll find out what you found as a young, person going through FMS. And what I'm saying is friction this, because people look at that and, well, is that mobility or stability? I'm like, yes, it is.
Yeah.
I'm using your mobility and stability together the way the good Lord intended you to do it, not to go to a mobility camp and come back and then automatically be good. Because you gain an ounce of length, you need to gain an ounce of strength, or I upset the delicate balance of things. So I really challenge people, if you can modulate movement in a short session, then you're dealing with a tone issue, and they're either stressing themselves wrong or they're under recovered. And if you can influence movement very quickly, look for tissues that need a little bit of extra help. And that's where people are using the compression boots, the Nematech, the sauna, the cold plunge, just to generally readjust your metabolism first, to pull 40 extra minutes of deep sleep, to hydrate not just with liquid, but electrolyte rich liquid. So spend some time getting your tissue matrix ready to change, or just take your foot off the freaking brake. And there's always a little bit of tissue problem in tone and vice versa. But if I can change your toe touch or your prone press up, or if I can give you a push up in a single session, let's be honest, you needed calibration, right?
Right.
Not conditioning. You needed calibration. Adaptation is a 4 to 6 week reconditioning the tissue with better recovery practices and better mechanized stress. So, and most people can't have that discussion. Well, I don't know. I just really want to clean up that posterior chain. Well, that posterior chain is operating off a signal from the brain that says parking brake, or that posterior chain is essentially unhealthy. It's bad protoplasm. Which is it? Because green tea ain't going to fix one of those.
Right. Yeah. So like, I mean, the beautiful overarching message really here is about it's better to eliminate the things that aren't serving you versus just trying to add a bunch of new shit in to try and get a response from there. I've talked about that with my crew about it's recovery before discovery. Like we're always looking to discover more ways to add more stuff into our life versus if you actually eliminate the things that aren't serving you anymore, holy shit, now you have all this new energy that you can put into all the things and you don't really need to do that many things to elicit the response that you're looking for from there. So with that though, what you said before a workout, like getting in the flows, I understand that really well. Is there a specific reason why before bed that's so powerful?
It is because how many people, whatever happens between your workout and the time your head hits the pillow, whether it be kids or your partner or a disturbing phone call or a traffic jam, you're going to reacquire your natural patterns of unnecessary tension.
Mhm.
And so you can have better recovery. Like I've actually had a 2-level cervical spine fusion. I've done a lot of stupid things. I've had a lot of musculoskeletal injuries. So part of my broken sleep is pain. If I can get rid of the unnecessary extra upper trap tension and low back tension and just sort of wake up my anterior chain a little bit before I go to bed, it is measurably better sleep. And it's not a workout. It's a 5-minute thing. It could be a rolling thing. It could be a balancing thing. It could be a very light Turkish getup. But it's almost that recalibration before rest and not just before stress. And my whole point is, if you let's say it's a toe touch, all right?
Okay.
You wake up, you can't touch your toes, you go through your little kata and you can. You're like, I better do that before my run. You come back off your run, you still got your toe touch. Check it before bed. You might have lost 4 inches, right? You tense them
Right.
back up. Reset it again before bed because you won't have to do this for the rest of your life. But if you can do a 2-a-day, and Kelly Starrett calls it flossing, right? And
Right.
he gets more toward one body part. I'm like flossing a pattern. So if we can floss your hip hinge twice a day, you won't need to floss it except as a warm up after that.
Mhm.
And you can check it anytime. So if you, a couple of years ago, I had to fly to Beijing. Yeah. I probably didn't have a toe touch when I got off that
If you did, you're freaking awesome.
1-day flight. Right. So you're going to have episodes in your life, like with the flu
Mhm.
or
Yep.
strain in your low back. And if you already know that it's a bad lunge on your left or poor single leg stance on your right, or your toe touch is the first thing to go when you get stressed out, you already know what to do. Right. And it only takes 5 minutes to get your foot off the brake. Why wouldn't you do that? So
Yeah. It's funny. I did a, 2 10-hour drives this weekend going to Cincinnati from New York. And as I was doing a workshop over with Brett, kept getting this really fun cramp going on in the lat doing work. And Brett's like, yeah, you drove in the car for 10 hours yesterday. Yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit, it's probably a little bit off with your 40-year-old body. It's going to happen.
well, isn't it funny? Lee and I were down at the, I guess Fort Bragg is 82nd Airborne, and we got a bunch of young dudes. And I'm like, I can already tell you most of you got broken sleep. How do you know that? We didn't give you our wearable information yet because they're all on Coach Me Plus and things like
Yep.
that. And I'm like, because you're drinking Red Bulls at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's it.
there's no way 9:30, 10 o'clock sleep is coming easy for you. It's just not.
Yeah.
They got their dip in one side, sipping a Red Bull in the other. I'm like, you're young and
It's called the lunch of champions right there. That's after your Wheaties in the morning. So it is. I always look at every time I go back to going deep dive into FMS work, I always realize how simple it is to do the things that we really make us feel the best. We always think that it's a very complicated process to get to where we want to go. It must be this or it must be this versus no, it's probably just a little bit of just finding your baseline again and just always getting back to baseline. That's why I know when we talked the other day, you said the first corrective session that you do with somebody is your second screen. It's going back into the second screen at all times. And I think that was such a valid point because how many practitioners we go in and we go into like just the first screen and then we just immediately go into corrections, but we don't go back to where the baseline is at all. I think that's such an important point just to always go back to the initial part and always remember that those basics.
Well, I put this in the Business of Movement book, is that The first connection point I want with you after we do a movement screen is I'm not going to sit there with your scorecard and say, you had a really bad active straight leg raise on the left. Your push-up could be a lot better, and I don't like your shoulder mobility at all. I've heard people do that. No one's ever heard me do that, ever, right? I'm ground zero with this shit, and I'd never approach a pro athlete or my mom's friend like that. I would take the movement screen, full knowledge of the pattern that's probably the most complicated, put them in a position. And so if it were a athlete much stronger than myself, I'd put them in a narrow base, half kneeling chop and show them how much better they are at push hands, right? Don't let me move.
Yeah.
And then put the other knee down, like a deer on ice, right? They just can't do anything. So I take what I gained in that screen back to a object lesson, something as simple as the tortoise and the hare, right? I'm just going to take right to this thing. And no matter how hard you try, you're going to do worse. So if you can't rotate left, right, there's no conscious coaching cue I can give you that'll make you weight shift appropriately and rotate left. But until you admit that, we're not in agreement. So first domino, you and I got to connect on what this pinch point is, because I'm not going to tell you your screen numbers are better. At the end of whatever I ask you to do, a cook hip lift or rolling, we're going to go back to that left knee down chopping or lifting challenge, not the exercise. Just, I'm going to put you here. I'm going to try to push you around, and you're going to feel less vulnerable, more confident, and better grounded. Because you're getting ready to say to me, why do we do all that? That's why.
Right. Okay.
You're getting ready to try to see in my use of exercise how we got there. Because let's be honest, strength conditioning is either paint by numbers or it's thinking outside of the box. If you got a balance problem, I can spend 10 minutes with you on the balance beam, and I'm sure we can get your balance up a little bit, just practicing the test.
Right.
But I've always disadvantaged myself to get that higher level skill set. If I think that your balance problem is T-spine mobility or anxiety breathing, or, it's actually not a balance problem, it's poor balance on the right leg, then I go deep into that thing. And I use the beam as the relevance of the investment. So I'll mob your ankle, tape your ankle, and do something in half kneeling, put you right on the balance beam that you were just vulnerable on. And I instantly upgraded your balance. Now, the way I describe it to the patient or the athlete or the client I'm working with is, I didn't make your balance better. That is your innate balance. I unburdened what you did before.
Right.
What
that recalibration.
Before, right. You weren't there. And so I always convert what I find on a movement screen or a Y balance test or one of my other tests to a tangible thing that you could practice in front of the TV set at home. But I ask you not to practice this. This is your touchstone. This is your thing. So this is where we connect on awareness. The next thing I get you to agree on is, what would make your lat worse? Well, we already know, a 10-hour car drive, right? So the one thing we're not going to do anymore is a 10-hour car drive. We're going to do a 4-hour car drive and a 5-minute stretch and break.
Right.
And we're going to do another 4-hour car drive and a stretch and break. And when you get out of that last 2 hours on the car, you're going to look as good as when you got in the car. And it's 10 minutes, that we did. So I get people to admit, what would make you feel worse? Well, a bad night's sleep, I know this is going to be worse. If I'm dehydrated, I cramp on this side. So I go to the laundry list of all the things not that will make this better, but that could easily make this worse. And let's agree not to do those, because I've wasted a lot of correctives on people that didn't protect the downside.
Right.
Right. You got to pay off all your credit cards, not just the one that's easiest to pay off. So what I try to do is, if we can agree that we're going to protect the trajectory of this thing we're aware of, If you know, if you got to have that much high fructose corn syrup in your diet, because we
Mhm.
know it adds to inflammation.
Mhm.
There are 5 foods right now, or food categories, that if you've got an inflammation problem, I'm like, do me a favor. I'm not going to tell you how to eat, but watch the sugar, watch
Right.
the watch the dairy, watch the soft drinks, not while I'm trying to get you out of back pain. Because
Mhm.
if we don't do this in 2 weeks, you're going to be on an epidural and steroids. So deflame yourself before I add you a corrective. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I do. People will come, they won't establish awareness in what they're trying to do for the person, and then they won't protect the downside, right? So I need a marker, and I need you to know what you can do to make it worse. Because I got you for an hour, you got you for 23.
Right. That's such a powerful message on awareness right there. Cause I did that for years with people. I would do a screen and then, all right, let's go over it. And we're going over every line. And they're kind of looking at you like you have two heads, like, okay, well, what the heck does this mean? You're kind of speaking different languages. So to go right away into those positions that are going to right away show them the discrepancy or the deficiency right there. Now you're starting to speak the same language. And when you can feel it like that, then you get even buy-in more. And when people have buy-in more, then they can look at the things that are diminishing their results and they can eliminate them even easier. So now you guys are all speaking the same language. So that approach of it, I think, is so important and so powerful of what you just said. So,
Well, think
but
about it. If you've ever looked at an MRI, and you got the geek that's trying to explain to you every piece of contrast in the MRI and how they did it and the sagittal plate and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, I need you to look me in the eye and say, yeah, you've got some pressure on L4. I know why your quad feels that way,
Mhm.
right? That I need you to look at that MRI. Don't try to make me a radiologist. Tell me if
Right.
what you see lines up with what I feel, or if I'm batshit crazy. Both are good pieces of information.
Yeah. Have you seen in our culture just doing screens and working with people in screens for so long, are there more common dysfunctions that you see from from like a screen with people? Is it more, do we have more of a deficiency in mobility or stability or so? Have you seen like like more of a most common dysfunction among us as a whole?
Yeah, it definitely is mobility. And
Yeah.
the FMS was built with a mobility bias. And really, people think that I came to the 7 patterns of the FMS through my knowledge of exercise. Because one of the moves is called a lunge, and one's called a squat, and one's called a push-up. But these are all movements that naturally occur in the first 18 months of life without any verbal instruction whatsoever. You learn to walk most of the time before you can say 3 words. Therefore, nobody can coach you into this. You naturally got bipedal by going through a drive to explore your environment, right? I can make better time crawling than rolling, and I can make better time walking than crawling, and I can make even better time running than walking. So
Mhm.
you've got a natural drive to express yourself through predictable movement patterns to explore your environment. And the funny thing is, the World Health Organization agrees on these developmental milestones that you must achieve. If your child is not rolling by this age, let's look into it. It doesn't mean they're going to have a developmental delay. It just means they could be oversensitive, or they could be over or understimulated. And I've had kids that completely skipped a crawling phase, and their mom's like, well, I don't know how to get them to crawl. I'm like, those little tunnels and tubes you can buy at the toy store? Yeah, take their blankie and throw it in there. They'll sit outside and cry
They're
for a
gonna
while
go.
before they're gonna go. And you can't walk through the tube, and you can't roll through the tube. You got to get it. So
Yeah.
anyway, these patterns are naturally expressed all the way around the planet in every 18-month-old, right? In certain milestones and windows of time. So these are important things, right? Here's what I noticed as a young physical therapist, because I'd had an opportunity to see some different cultures. My dad was a missionary in Mexico and Honduras. Americans can't squat. Now, we got a lot of squat racks and we got a lot of Smith machines and we got a lot of discussion. We probably talk about squatting more than any other culture that's ever been on the planet. And as a group of North Americans, we freaking can't do it. We can't do it.
Isn't
And
that
we
isn't that the
persist.
old like spot when the guy like had a rifle? That was like the old military like that was the shooting position. They actually dropped into a deep squat and held up. That was the original military shooting position.
And one time, the shooting instructor had so many dudes that couldn't do that. Instead of fixing the squat, we deleted the position. No, seriously, that's in one of my presentations. And so, isn't that the American way? We have lowered military standards, I think, significantly 5 times since the 1960s, simply to get enough people to serve. Now, you got to admit, World War II, most of the guys going through boot camp couldn't break 150 pounds. So
Right.
we're bigger dudes than we were because we're, you know, homogenized,
Eating.
pasteurized
Yep.
milk and corn, you're going to swell up quick. But so we've got better BMI and more pull-ups. So if we're going to be this big, we either got to get stronger or we don't need to be this big. That's the message there. So functional body-wise strength, we have declined, and nobody called us out on it because it's so easy to sit down and push on a machine and call yourself fit by fitness standards, and you get a fitness check mark for that. You just don't get a functional check mark for that.
Yeah. That's where I remember it's like, I mean, the 4 pillars talk about it's the health, then function, then fitness, then you're building skill on top of it. So quickly we go right to the 3 and 4. We want to get the skills so we look really cool, and we want to feel like we're physically fit. But without the function, as we talked about before, like eventually this stuff is gonna catch up to you. Maybe not right away, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it's gonna catch up to you. So
Well, all right, you know Brett, and Brett
mhm.
has amazing grip strength, right?
Strong dude.
I'm right up the road from John Brookfield, and he's been here a bunch of times for me to work on him. And John's got amazing grip strength. What people don't understand is we've had a decline in grip strength because, you know, if I put you on a handheld dynamometer and have you just crush that thing, and then I put your neck or your shoulder in an awkward position, I can take about 30 pounds off your grip strength anytime I want. That's how we get a knife or a gun out of your hand too. We use a biomechanical submission or lever break. So I can give you bad biomechanics or I can give you neural tension. Either one will make you dump your grip. Okay, that's known. How many people are standing around right now with bad angles and neural tension? So this inherent grip strength that we're all trying to strengthen, aren't those same people working on their grip in the same bad
So,
neural
yeah.
tension? Right. So I think our forefathers had a more natural, unburdened, manly grip strength, right? They're
Yeah.
they're just
Just like
strong
functional
dudes.
posture. Yeah.
You got it. So, you know, a couple of things. When we see guys like Mickey Mantle, who partied his butt off, but could still hit from both sides of the plate, forearms like Popeye, grip like you wouldn't believe. We know that in golf. Bobby Jones, the golfer that Augusta National, the Masters we just got through, he could tear a deck of cards in half.
Yeah.
Okay. Bobby Jones. So
And Bobby was a
people,
small dude. He was not a big dude at all. He was a
no,
slight man.
no.
Yeah.
And you look at guys like Joe Namath who abused his body, but you
Yeah.
look at the hands on that guy and the grip strength. So there are some natural things of grip and foot strength that, because we don't go barefoot, because we don't do stuff, everything you pick up in the gym has a preordained grip that gives you a competitive advantage, not a
Right.
disadvantage. So you have to use your hand in the amazing different ways it can be used. And in doing that, we try to sort of have a bookshelf. And well, I've you know, checked the boxes for squat this week. I've checked the boxes for back this week. I've checked the boxes for arms and legs this week. Yeah, but you still can't move. And the whole
Right.
purpose of doing that was movement, unless you are going to pose, and then let's just call it that, but let's not call it movement training.
Right. That's really fascinating to talk about the grip strength. I didn't think about it that way, but how natural just good posture and good function affects those certain things. And everything now is ergonomically developed, so it's nice and cozy and gives you that competitive advantage, specifically with grip, which has such a correlation in overall strength, as we
Well, you
know.
know, the if you study Buddhism and meditation postures, they are to get the spine in its natural supportive
Mhm.
way. And even if you can't sit in the lotus position, we're going to let your hips be in a position where your spine can be angled. Now, whether you want to call it the chakras are in alignment or whether you want to call it chi or whatever, chiropractic and osteopathic theories are built on if you sacrifice the integrity of the spine to move, all hope is lost because that is the trunk of the tree.
Mhm.
The trunk is more important than the limbs. It just is, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the trunk is the function of the tree because if there was no trunk, we call it a shrub, right?
Right.
So there's something inherently uh, bad because when I see ones on the movement screen, you've got to give up spine to crawl. You've got to give up spine to lunge. You've got to give up spine to squat. You've got to give up spine to reach. You've got to give up spine to leg raise.
Mhm.
Because if you got a one on the leg raise and can still touch your toes, then we know what part of that was hip contribution and what part of that is coming from your back. And
Right.
so deep within the FMS, even though a lot of people think Stu and I disagree on many things, because his expertise is going right in on back anatomy and mine is backing away and taking the 10,000
Zoom out.
foot
Yeah.
view, right? But we both emerge. Never give up the integrity of the spine to get stuff. Now,
Mhm.
people get confused by that and it's like, well, when that guy's crawling, he doesn't have lordosis. Neither does a cheetah. See, when you're on all fours, the rules of the spine are different. The
Mhm.
spine has to be flexible and mobile and adaptive. When you are carrying the burden of bipedal posture and some of the things you do with manipulation, grappling, and stuff like that, your spine is the only ground you got because at any
Mhm.
given time, you might not have both feet where you want them.
Right.
So that ability to orient your vision, your proprioception around a spine. And the minute we put a kink in your spine, we're standing on the biggest fiber optic cable that's ever been invented. Don't want to do that because you got tight pecs, but
Right.
tight pecs will make you put your neck in a really awkward
Mhm.
position, which then diminishes your grip strength, hurts your head on a swivel,
Yeah.
compromises your breathing. You know, it's just a vicious cycle. The wheels just start falling off the cart. And
Yeah.
all because you needed to squeeze out two more reps that you'd have been better off not doing. Because
Right.
the last two reps you did the shittiest ones. And that's the one you just remembered. You hit
Yeah. Oh,
save
yeah.
on the worst document you ever wrote. Good boy.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask one more thing about you. With all the work that you've done with movement over these years, is there a biggest evolution in your thought process of how you view movement now versus when you started? Like something that you've changed your mind on over time or seen the importance of at such a big level over this time as you've continued with your work?
You know, when I came at it, I wasn't the first guy to use the word functional. I wasn't. But I was the first guy to say, if you're going to say it, you better define it, you better measure it, and you better professionally be able to influence it. And without some type of screen or scale, it's just going to be me against Mike Boyle, against Brett Jones, against Pavel, right? It's just a bunch of well, uh, well thought out opinions that may friction each other, but none of us will ever not agree that giving up quality to get quantity of movement is a good choice. We
Right.
might disagree on the quality touch points, but let's be honest. 2020 vision has a metric that goes with it. If you can't read that line from here, I can't give you 2020 vision. And if at rest you can't post this blood pressure number, I got to call you hypertensive. So at some point, professionals have to say ball or strike, and it's close sometimes. And if we err in the direction of being conservative, you'll accomplish the goal pretty quick. But if we're scared to set a baseline, if we're scared to set a standard, then part of that may be scared that you can't influence it. And we just got to get over that. That's the stage fright you get the first time that you got to go into a spelling bee or something. And so I've always tried to get that level of transparency out, because what do we make you do in Mahwah, New Jersey? You got to screen somebody and you got to get screened.
Yep.
Right. And you got to feel the vulnerability of being probed and prodded and poked and not being perfect. And then on the other side, we just got to find one thing to work on, not 40 things to work on. So function, even though we were all comfortable using the word prior to 1995, it was self-serving, right? Ask a plumber if you need new pipes. The answer is yes. And he hadn't even seen your friggin' house yet, right? Because he does better if you get new pipes.
Right.
And me and you do better if we can keep you engaged in exercise, whether you need them or not. So it can be self-serving if we don't set a baseline. I now take issue with the word wellness, because movement isn't just a predictor of functional risk, right? Dysfunction, higher risk, and the more physical exposure you have, the more at risk you are and the more complicated your next injury could be. Well, I see people using the word wellness now, and we got health. If your vital signs are where they need to be, okay, you're not in acute distress and you're not in pain, I can call you healthy, because your current state of readiness has been vetted by some numbers that say
there's some standards.
Now, depending on what fitness camp you're in, we've got some standards, right? And if we can check those boxes, we by default of the check boxes call you fit. But to call you well, because you could check your fitness boxes and you could check your health boxes and you could still have risk factors, right? Did I check balance yet? You could be a good compensator. So what we realized, wellness is, do you have acceptable risk, elevated risk, moderate risk? And so we're not used to talking about that because it's not sexy. It's not sexy at all. But when it comes down to making a prediction of the future, and when I'm looking at a person who's had 5 years in the NFL and a team's trying to decide whether we got 3 more years or not, we ain't looking at their 40-yard dash.
Right.
We're looking at their medical record, but what we're trying to do is get a projection. So if I've got an athlete that's had an ACL, but their movement screen is great and their rest and recovery is great, their HRV post's pretty good and they've accomplished, I don't see them at any more risk than somebody who hadn't had the surgery but can't touch their toes or rotate to the left. And so when we approach this word wellness, I'm finding as much confusion of what we think standards are as I did when I approached function. I didn't want to make a functional movement screen, but I also saw people using the word and really not having a baseline. So whatever I say it is, and that's not good. And so I think we need to understand that, believe it or not, I think, and I said this in the business of movement, if we get our movement metrics right, movement is the canary in the coal mine that will alert us that we're headed in a bad direction even before our other tests recognize it. I think HRV is probably another one. And scientifically speaking, I don't think HRV has a placebo effect, meaning if it's better, it's better, right? And that's the way I feel about movement. If your squat was bad and now it's better, if I didn't sacrifice your shoulder mobility to get there, if I didn't make another movement screen worse to get there, then it's better. And here's why. Your mind and your mouth can lie to me. Your movement can't, because most of the movements I'm checking in a movement screen are subconscious, and you've already done every one of them because you were 18 months old at one time. So it's on the hard drive, it's in the DNA, and it's part of a universal movement signature. And so if you've amputated or hurt your lunge in any way, that mark is on you and I can see it. I don't just need the scar, I got movement dysfunction as a secondary scar. So the movement screen is telling me things about you that you can't tell me.
Right.
Therefore, I got to do it if I'm going to take charge of the trajectory of this thing. Because if you knew how to train yourself, you wouldn't be here. And I'm not here just to tell you you're doing a great job, because if you were doing a great job, you wouldn't be here.
Right.
So I've got to show you what you're missing. I got to show you where you're missing it. And I got to show you how maybe a little bit of faith, don't trust me, test me, can change the numbers. And I think it's really hard to change a movement screen. Now, there's a lot of people that do a movement test. They'll do an overhead deep squat, or they'll do a single balance test. They'll practice the test and then say they made you more functional. But unless I'm looking at all the other patterns too, you don't know that. Because what if you made one worse to get one better? And so that full array of movement screening is a subconscious signature of your state of risk and how much you're going to have to compensate if life goes sideways for you. So I think your HRV and some of your basic movement signatures, like your balance, fundamental movement patterns, and grip strength, we shouldn't get away from those things right now, because they don't just tell us people are weak and stiff. They tell us that they're in a toxic environment. They have burdened calibration. And all you got to do is run the quick pass to know, is there a lot of tissue dysfunction here, or is this just a tone dysfunction? And on the other side of that, you start programming, let's dump tension before we add stress, because your reaction time is going to go up if we don't, right? And that's bad for movement learning.
Yeah. That's so powerful. Everything you said there, specifically about the words. I'm fascinated by words, because I think so many definitions are so subjective, from things like mindset that nobody can define, into things like you just said with wellness. We throw these words out so much, but nobody has a definitive idea of exactly what it is. So just having these standards down for everything that you're bringing out here, I just think is so powerful. It's such a good message for us communicating all in the same way. Otherwise we're all at odds with each other. And as you said, might be really thought out type stuff, and we can bitch at each other for hours and hours, but we're not getting anywhere, and we're not helping people if we can get one way that we're all understanding it. And here, I think that's so powerful. So
I'm a big quote guy, because I like that. I love Mark Twain. I love my Socrates. I love Plato. I love all the Stoicism stuff that Ryan Holiday is making us remember. And one quote that's come across my desk a few months back, and I've been using it almost every chance I get, is this: when all is said and done, way more is said than done. And I don't want to be part of that problem. If I see a problem, I want to do something about it. And this goes back to a lot of the touches I've had where the movement screen took Lee and I into the highest levels, the tip of the spear of the military. Information, action, reflection, right? You're after action, right? So most people are going to information a topic. They're going to under action a topic, and they're going to fail to reflect on anything. And so my point is, that's why I say, don't trust me, test me. Or do you think it's tone or tension? I'm going to give you a tissue or tone. I'm going to give you a way to find that out. But if you're not going to take action, then we don't have much to reflect on, right? So I think because of the ease of Google and research, and most of what you're reading on the internet is highly influenced by marketing, not the truth. And you just got to be able to wade through that. But I think today's information consumer doesn't take action because nobody tells them how to do it. And that's what I've been trying to tell people. If you got a balance problem, try to fix it without a balance exercise first. And you asked me, do we have more mobility or stability problems? We have movement problems. But the reason we have stability problems in 50% of the population is because they got mobility problems. So they're already compensating. So you can't truly prove poor stability if you've got to stabilize around a stiff ankle, a tight back, and a bad hip. You've got but you're upright and you're doing the best you can. So it would be inappropriate to call that a stability problem and work on stability when I realize that most of stability, the dynamic stability that you run, is subconscious, and it's running off your joint angles and your muscle tension and your fascial tensegrity. So if you don't have full range of motion, you're not working with enough information. And if you're not working with enough information, you can't take appropriate action. So Americans inherently have mobility problems. And once you're on the other side of that, you're going to find a lot of stability and asymmetry problems. But you'd fix most of these people with a gentle approach to reclaim mobility, not aggressive, foam rolling and tissue work and stuff like that. Just, paint the fence, sand the floor, wax the car. Before you know it, you'll block a punch.
I love it. I love it. Gray Cook, Gray, thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, I've learned so much from you over the years, and now I've learned so much more today on it. So I really appreciate your time and jumping on here. So I appreciate it, brother.
No, thank you, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So what's coming up next for you? I know you're always traveling, you're always doing stuff. What's on the docket for you coming up in the next few months?
Two things. I wrote a book last year called The Business of Movement to actually predict what Lee and I were going to next. And it just came out in the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy. We developed a self-screen that covered almost 80% of what a movement screen would cover without having to put somebody on the floor and without needing a camera. It is a self-screen, and we're using it in areas where people are coming to a training session or exiting rehab, just so it can have the same conversation, or it can level up the conversation I need to have with you. But it's not just a movement screen anymore. We're doing a sleep questionnaire, a breath hold test. We're doing a nutritional awareness test, a quick hip to waist ratio, BMI perspective, activity level, behavioral health, and past medical history. Nobody ever gets that cross section of you in the same day. You got a nutrition question, you talk to the nutrition person without telling them how you sleep, which may be way more part of your cortisol levels than your bad diet, right? So everybody wants to make you well, but in their own silo. And so my hypothesis was, since I never want you to look at one movement pattern, you should probably never look at one lifestyle domain without looking at the other. So a breathing problem turns into a sleep problem called sleep apnea. And you wind up with a CPAP and nobody ever shows you how to crocodile breath, right? Which might fix the whole thing. So we've got this app called Simeo, and all the courses Lee and I are teaching, we make all the people go on Simeo right now and just see where you got red flags and risk. And the funny thing is, since we have this correlation with the movement screen already, it doesn't, when I'm working with NFL players, I'm going to need the movement screen, a Y balance test, some other stuff. But I can already put anything from student athletes to a geriatric wellness class in one of three categories right away. They're all going to do the same program. I got high risk, moderate risk, and low risk based on their self-care and lifestyle and complicating factors. And the funny thing is, it is more opportunity to connect with my clients and athletes and patients now, because I don't have to be a sleep expert to say you flunked your sleep screen.
Right.
And I don't have to be John Berardi to say you don't have good nutritional awareness, right? And I don't have to be a respiratory therapist to say you flunked your breathing screen, right? And if these things don't get unflunked in a couple of weeks, maybe we do need to speak to an expert. But just level them up. Look at all those red flags and ask yourself, if they're not fully recovered, why would I mess around with stress right now? Let me help you get recovered, which is one of the reasons we like to see you do a flow before you go to sleep. If I get you 20 more minutes of deep sleep and an extra REM cycle, your brain and body are going to wake up a little bit better. So.
Yeah, I love it. And the book, Business of Movement, phenomenal book. Just finishing it right now. It's absolutely great. So any listeners, go check this out from Gray. And functional movement systems, you got to perform better. Hopefully I can get down to Rhode Island. I'd love to see you in person. So hopefully we can make that happen.
Chris Poirier, speaking of perform better, Chris Poirier, back in the day when people knew what DVDs were, me and Lee and Brett did the Secrets of the Shoulder, right? Well, Chris challenged, he said, I wish we had something like that on YouTube right now. And so I did. I took the 5 movement patterns on the Simeo self screen and said, whether you do a medical movement screen in FMS or Simeo, there's a hip hinge in there. there's a squat in there.
Mhm.
There's a balance maneuver in there. So let's talk about these categorically and not by the isolated test, because in each of these tests, I'm grabbing something that you had between 0 and 18 months.
Mhm.
And the way we flesh that out doesn't matter whether you're a patient, a client, or an athlete. A movement is a movement. So what I said is I can attack every movement pattern we're testing in one of 4 postures: supported spine, suspended spine, stacked spine, or standing spine. And basically suspended is any form of plank or quadruped or crawl. And a stacked spine is half tall kneeling or sitting, standing is standing. And so the entry point, and that's the point you brought up, the second movement screen you do is really on your influence of the screen they walked in on. And it was a high influence, a low influence. And number one, you got to pick the right pattern. But the entry point, you get to pick the posture. And so I go as low in the postural hierarchy as I can and still see the problem. So if you're an NFL quarterback and I can still see your problem in quadruped or rolling, that's where we start. And all of a sudden, I don't have to tell you how to weight shift when you throw. It happens because I cleaned it up at the headwaters of the problem. You can go out in your backyard and pull the tops off weeds, or you can get the whole damn root, but you won't be there next week doing the same thing if you get the frickin' root the first time. So,
oh, that's beautiful. All right, we're going to grab all those. We're going to put them in the show notes too, so people can take a look at it from YouTube. So, Gray, great seeing you. Thank you so much for coming on again, man.
Let's do it again. I'd love to hear some of the questions we stimulate, but if I can see you at that pre-con, come on down. We'll do one of these live.
No doubt, absolutely. Maybe we'll film that as well. So, brother, thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much. Go follow Gray, check it out, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Hey, peace.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. And you'll also get exclusive access to these Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait. Go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.